Good morning, everyone. We are learning Mishnah Harah, Perek Bey, Chapter 2, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah 1. Dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomis Rabinowitz, Shlomis Bas Reb Yaakov Eliezer. Okay, so we need a introduction before we begin. And that is that there is a concept in the Torah called bittul, nullification. And let me read to you from the way the art scroll here has the introduction. Prohibited items that become mixed with permitted items become batal, nullified in a simple majority. For example, if one prohibited item falls into two permitted items, if one prohibited item falls into two permitted items, we cannot tell which one is a prohibited one. All three may be used because the prohibited item has become nullified, which means it's lost its prohibited status through its mixture with the larger number of permitted items. Okay, that's the concept of bittul b'roiv, being nullified in the majority. Okay, the situation is more complicated when it comes to food mixtures because the prohibited food adds its forbidden flavor to the mixture as a whole. Things will change when the issue is not just a prohibited and permitted item mixed together, but let's say the prohibited item gives flavor into the mixture, then there's going to be a somewhat of a different set of rules. Therefore, food mixtures require more than a simple majority to nullify prohibited food in them. In the case where giving flavor, a majority is not going to be enough. There must be so much more permitted food that someone eating the mixture would not taste the flavor of the prohibited food. That's how it works when there is a prohibited food. When a prohibited food gives flavor into a permitted food, we have a principle of tam ki'ikar. The flavor is like the prohibited item itself. I don't have the prohibited item here. I just have the flavor of it. But the flavor of it is like the prohibited item itself. And as long as the flavor is detectable, it's going to be considered prohibited. I have a mixture of, and that mixture of permissible and prohibited food is going to be a problem because if the flavor is detectable, then I have forbidden food here. Okay. So now, however, if I have enough permitted food that would basically nullify it, there's so much, it becomes the flavor becomes diluted, right? You lose it. You can't tell when there's a point where there's so much permitted food that the flavor given off by the prohibited food won't be detectable anymore. Okay, when that happens, then that's when we consider that the flavor is nullified once it can't be detectable. Now, how would you be able to go and detect that? Because it's forbidden. Right? If it's forbidden, you can't taste it. The answer is, the halacha says, if you could find a non-Jewish chef who can taste it and tell you whether the taste is there or not, that would be a possible way to determine that there's no more flavor. We don't rely on that. And we rely and what we work with is with the following, which is when this cannot be determined, meaning let's say even in a situation where there's no way to determine, there's no non-Jewish chef around. We generally require 60 times more permitted food than prohibited food to permit the mixture, since most flavors can be detected in these proportions. Once you hit the proportion of 60 to 1, that we can assume there is no more flavor there. Okay. Now, so right now we have two principles. We have a principle that if there's no flavor being given off, a majority would nullify. In a situation where there is flavor, there has to be enough permitted food to make sure that the flavor is not detected anymore. If I have no way of determining that directly, then 60 times more of the permissible food to the prohibited food would be enough to able to assume that the flavor of the prohibited food is not there anymore. Now, it's also important to know what's brought down here in the notes. And that is when the prohibited and permitted foods are both the same kind, what's called the min b'minoi, one kind and the other kind, in the same kind. For example, kosher slaughtered meat with non-kosher meat of the same kind. The taste of prohibited food can never be detected. Nevertheless, 60 times more permitted food is needed to nullify the forbidden food by rabbinic decree. So when I have min b'mina, when I have two of the same foods, there's no way to detect any flavor, which would therefore really say that, the flavor is not detectable. It shouldn't make a difference. But rabbinically, meaning a majority, then would be enough. But we say no. Rabbinically, the rabbis decreed that we need 60 times there as if it would go ahead and give flavor. Okay, now, when the two foods are not of the same kind, min be'enai minai, two different kinds, for example, bacon mixed with kosher meat, and there was meaning that's when you have two different types and a flavor can be detected. That's when we say you either go with the non-Jewish kosher chef, or you got to go with 60 times more. Now, this is the rule for foods that were blended together or cooked together. Okay, blended together or cooked together in a situation where, again, the flavor would either be detectable or not. The rule for peas that simply got mixed together but did not give any flavor to each other, yavish b'yavish, dry and dry, is somewhat different. Meaning, until now, we're talking about where flavor is detectable. If it's min b'minoi, the same type of things, it's not going to be detectable. You still need 60. If it's two different types of things, so where the flavor is given off, which would be either when they're cooked together, or we have two liquids that blend together, that are blended together, that are really mixed together, then we say, if you can taste it, then it's a problem. If you can't taste it, it's nullified. Okay? But if, let's say, we're talking about what's called yavish b'yavish, two dry things, they don't give off flavor to each other. They're two different types of things, but there's no giving off flavor with each other. Okay? There still needs a proportion of 60 to 1. They are different kind. I'm sorry. These still need a proportion of 61 when they are different kinds, but only a simple majority when they are the same kind. If you have yavish b'yavish, two things that really don't blend together, they're just mixed together and we can't tell which is which. So if they are of different types, then again, rabbinically, we need 60 times more. If they are of the same type, meaning they're both dry and they're the same type, then a simple majority is enough to nullify. Okay, this is the general rule when it comes to bittul. However, our Mishnah, meaning and the situation we've been dealing with until now is permissible food, forbidden food, kosher food, non-kosher food. But now the Mishnah is going to talk about foods where the rules are different. Okay, and the Mishnah begins: Hatruma utrumas meiser shel demai. Truma is the grain that we have to give to the part of the grain that we have to give to the kohen. Trumas meiser is after the kohen gets, after a Levi gets his meiser, the 10th, he has to give a 10th of that 10th to the kohen. Whether that is talking about a situation where we know for sure meiser needs to be given, or the Mishnah's case is demai. Demai is where you buy grain from an amaretz, from an unlearned person. We are concerned that he doesn't take off meiser, doesn't take off the 10th that goes to the Levi, and therefore you buy grain from a unlearned person, from amaretz, you have to separate meiser in case you didn't give to the Levi, and you have to also separate a 10th from that 10th to go to the kohen. Or challah, which we learned not long ago, the piece of dough that's taken off that's given to the kohen, v'abikurim, or the first fruits of the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, that we have to take the first ripened fruits to the Beis HaMikdash and give it to the kohen. Right? So in all these cases, these are all examples of things that go to the kohen. And actually they're all, and the reason they all go to the kohen is because they're called truma. In the Torah refers to all of them as truma, and it refers to them as truma. Now, if these go to a kohen, if the truma go to a kohen, a non-kohen is not allowed to eat them. So what happens if they get mixed up in the permissible food? Let's say truma or all these other things get mixed into chulin, regular food that anybody can eat. But now you have a mixture for permitted and non-permitted food. What do you do then? How much do you need to nullify? The Mishnah answers, Eilim be'echad umeya. You need 101. 60 to 1 is not enough. A majority is not enough, and 60 to 1 is not enough. In the case of truma, or anything that's called truma, the sages decreed that you need to nullify it, you need 100 to 1. Because of the special sanctified status, the sages decided we need to be more strict, and therefore 100 to 1, 100 parts of permissible to 1 part of forbidden, in these cases of truma, that will nullify it. 99 to 1, the thing will remain a mixture, and anybody not a Kohen is not going to be able to eat it because of the truma that's mixed in. Okay, now, umitztarfin ze im ze, and they can combine with each other. Combine with each other means that if, let's say, you have 100 parts chulin, meaning regular food, permissible food, and then you have 1 part of truma, and you have 1 part of bikurim. So you have 1 part truma, and you have 1 part chulin, and you have 1 part. Let's say the case, and you have 1 part truma, 1 part bikurim. So now we say these two combine together. Combine together means that it's not enough now to have 100 to 1, right? I need 200 to 2, because I have a larger, even though each one separately would have been nullified 100 to 1, but if they both fall in together, then they combine into one larger piece, so to speak, of forbidden food. And therefore now I've got to get my 100 to 1 ratio to the larger size. So I'm going to, in that case, 200 to 1. Even though they are different, there are different items there. The law upon them, one is truma, one is bikurim. Torah has separate mitzvahs for them. But in this case, according to all opinions, as we'll see soon differently in different cases, in this case, where all these things are called truma, they can all combine together to make a larger amount of permitted food, to now necessitate a larger amount of permitted food. V'tzarech laharim, and you have to raise up. That means, in a case where I have 100 permissible parts to 1 part of truma, or to 1 part of challah, or bikurim, whatever it may be, and we say that, okay, 100 to 1, it's nullified. Nullified means that anybody can eat from the entire mixture. There's no 1 part that I say no one can eat from because the truma has become nullified. But what the Mishna now is saying is it only becomes nullified in as far as a prohibition of a non-Kohen eating it. But at the same time, truma is the property of Kohanim in general. If we nullify that, there's sort of nullification. If the nullification says it's not truma to be eaten, but the idea that this is property of the Kohen, that nullification doesn't affect. So at the end of the day, although nullification will say that I can eat, but what about the fact that there is the money that's supposed to go to the Kohanim? Every Kohen potentially has the right to get his truma because it belongs to what's called Shevet Kahuna, the tribe of Kahuna. So even though it's nullified, but there's still a question of the property of the Kohen here. And therefore we say v'tzarech laharim, even though it comes out now that there's no prohibition on any of this from the part of eating truma to a non-Kohen, but at the end of the day, there's the Kohen's money here, and therefore the amount that fell in has to be separated from here in order to go ahead and to give the Kohen what was rightfully his. Okay, so that's the halacha when it comes to truma, trumas meiser, challah, bikurim. But now we're going to talk about arla. What our Mishna is about. Well, arla v'kilei akarim. Let's say arla gets mixed into chulin, into permissible food, or kilei akarim, which we mentioned before, means that if you plant a grain or a vegetable in a vineyard, you now forbid the vine and you forbid the vegetable or the grain. They all become prohibited. They all become prohibited even to have benefit from. So what happens when they go ahead and get mixed in to chulin food? What's the ratio then? Says the Mishna, you're going to need 200 to 1 then. The sages were even more strict by arla and kilei akarim because truma is only a prohibition to eat. To have benefit from truma, you could. If, let's say, a person were to inherit truma from his mother's father who was a kohen, you could sell it to a kohen, you can have benefit from it. Arla and kilei akarim, you can't have any benefit from it whatsoever. And therefore, the sages there are even more strict. And they say you need 200 to 1. And they can combine with each other. Meaning, if I have arla and kilei akarem, I have 100 part chulin, and and I have 1 part arla and 1 part kilei akerem that fall in together into this mixture, they combine to make a larger amount of prohibited food, and I'll need a larger amount to go ahead and to nullify them. I'm going to need 400 here. I'm going to need 200 to 1 based on the larger amount. But in this case, there's no need to raise up anything from this mixture. Arla doesn't go to anybody. Kilei akerem doesn't go to anybody. There's no one's property that got mixed in here. They have to be concerned that someone's going to be losing out on their money. Now, Reb Shimon says, Eina mitztarfin. In the case of arla and kilei akerem, they will not combine together. They remain separate. So if I have 100 parts chulin, and then 1 part arla and 1 part kilei akerem, the 100 part chulin will nullify the 1 part arla, and the 100 parts chulin will nullify the 1 part of kilei akerem. They don't combine, they remain separate. So then the 100 parts chulin has the ability to nullify each one. Reb Shimon is of the opinion that by arla and kilei akerem, where they are both separate prohibitions, the Torah never puts them together in any way. 2 separate prohibitions cannot combine together. Reb Shimon doesn't argue on the first case of the Mishnah about truma, trumas meiser, chal, and bikurim, because they're all referred to as truma. They all carry the same name truma. That is enough to make them the same that they can combine. Arla and kilei akerem are two distinct prohibitions, 2 different names. They're never categorized together under the same name, and therefore they remain separate even if they fall in together, and all it needs is 100 parts against each one. So they don't combine together. 100 parts chulin will take care of the 1 part arla and the 1 part kilei akerem. Rebbe Eliezer oimer mitzdarfim b'noisen tam. Rebbe Eliezer, his opinion is somewhere in the middle. The Tanakama said, the first opinion of the Mishnah was arla and kilei akerem combine. Rebbe Shimon says they don't combine. Rebbe Eliezer says sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Mitzdarfim b'noisen tam. If the issue here is in regard to giving flavor, then they will combine. So therefore, let's say we have grapes of arla and grapes of kilei akerem that fall into something being cooked. There it's a question of their flavor coming out. It's forbidden flavor in the permissible food. Now, typically, if I would have just had arla, we should have the arla flavor. So if the arla flavor is not detectable, then it's nullified. But now that there's the kilei akerem with it, now it does become detectable. So the combination of both creates a flavor. So when it comes to creating a flavor, that's where Rebbe Shimon says they could combine together. Okay, so therefore, if they're both going to give the flavor, so then we're going to say that the flavor needs to become nullified in order for it to be able to be permissible. In this case, we're going to see that when it's only a case of flavor, I don't need 100 times, I need 200 times. They just have to nullify the flavor. But again, according to Belezer, they will, kilei akerem and arla, although they're 2 distinct prohibitions, they will combine to give flavor of a lay lesser, but they will not combine in order to forbid. Meaning, if we have a mixture of dry and dry, where we have things mixing together in a way that they don't give off flavor to each other. So it's just basically some grapes of kilei akerem and grapes of arla that fell into just 1 second. All right. Whatever the case may be, we have a case of a container of food made from arla and a container of food made from kilei akerem got mixed up with 200 containers of food made from permissible fruit. Okay, you cooked something. You cook these things, right? You can't open it up and see which is which. So you have a container of food made from arla, a container of food made from kilei akerem, and they get mixed up in 200 containers of permissible food. Okay, so it's yavish b'yavish. There's nothing coming together anymore that they're going to give off flavor to each other. They're not blending in any way with each other. They're separate containers. They're separate items. The problem is that Two of the containers are, one is arla, one is kilei akerem. The other 100 are permissible food. I can't see anymore which is which. That's going to be a case where, according to Rebbe Lezer, says, now I don't say that the kilei akerem and the arla combine together. Two distinct prohibitions, they're not going to combine. And therefore, that your containers permissible food will be enough to nullify each one of the containers of the arla and the kilei akerem, since they don't combine together. And with 100 times of the permissible, it'll be enough to nullify both the container of arla and the container of kilei akerem, and everything will be permissible. Okay, we continue with the laws of Rechilas from the Chavetz Chaim, Klal Beis, chapter 2, Sif Dal, paragraph 4. Lefiza, according to this, Im shutev echad ratza listalek b'niden ha'esek shalai meshutafai, ki chashav sha'acheri mishtatfu imay v'lebesayf also b'yadai. Let's say a partner wanted to break up with his partner to partner with other people. That was the plan. Plan didn't work out. Now, people know about this. They know that this was this person's original plan, but it didn't work out. It is forbidden to let the first partner know what could have happened. Even though this came out, this was already known in front of 3 people or more. We should have been discussing until now the idea that in front of 3 people it gets spread, and therefore there's an opinion out there that says it's not forbidden. In this kind of case, there's no way that's going to work. It's no question that the partner will now bear a grudge against his partner who wanted to break it up. That could actually be a reason to cause the breakup of this present partnership, or that the partner is going to give his other partner a hard time for considering breaking up. Okay, in this kind of case, it falls under the category or the rule that the Rambam writes as to what is considered Lashon Harah. How does one know what constitutes Lashon Harah? The answer is, if you say words that would cause to cause physical damage to one's friend, or monetary damage, or to cause him anguish, or to frighten him, that's Lashon Harah. Well, that's the rule for Rechilas too. If at the end of the day, the news that you're telling about what somebody did to someone will cause that person some kind of pain or difficulty for hearing what this person said, did, wanted to do, whatever it may be, if it caused that same kind of animosity or animosity, that's called Rechilas. So the fact that it's going to be in front of 3 is that 3 people already knew that he wanted to do this, therefore we say it's going to spread, doesn't help in this kind of a case, because the Chavetz Chaim has said before, we don't really rely on that opinion that says it is permissible even if it's going to get spread, and especially in a situation, and even according to that opinion, that you could say, something derogatory then because it's going to get out, he's going to find out about it at the end, you're not allowed to try to spread it. You're not allowed to try to be the one to intentionally spread that news. Well, if you go in and tell the original partner about this person's the first partner about the other partner's plan to break up, you're basically doing worse than spreading the news. You're actually you're telling this person about what that other person wanted to do to him, and therefore there's no way for that to be permissible. So this just would be an example that the Chavetz Chaim felt was a common of example in his times, where you could have a situation where people knew what the original plan about was breaking up the partnership, but it fell through. Well, that is something for sure you cannot tell the present partner, because that will create animosity between the present partners. Have a wonderful day.